we are here the morning after the Republican National Convention. It was a 4-day affair that had, again, much like the Democratic Convention, a very different feel to it this year. You had an added layer, I would say, the GOP convention of a what appeared to be a very inappropriate mix of use of government buildings, including the White House, in particular during Donald Trump's speech last night. We will talk about that, but a very different affair. But the question, I think, Michael, still bottom line politically, is whether or not Donald Trump and the GOP did enough to try to get back into this presidential race. Because according to the polls, as we headed into this convention, he was still down by a fairly significant margin, not just nationally, but in most battleground states. And I think the question is, what did he do this week to try to make up that ground? And was he successful, in your opinion?
I don't know if he was successful, but I think that over the course of the 4 days, they did settle on a consistent theme, which I know they were accused of not having going into the convention. A consistent theme of attack against Biden, that he's a vessel of the far left. And whether or not that's going to work, we can talk about. But I do think that they did have some discipline throughout the convention, and so that in and of itself, you could say was an accomplishment. But overall, I was struck by just the hyperbole that you saw throughout, obviously, the president's speech and throughout the whole convention. I think it was really consistent hearing, comparisons between the socialism you're seeing on the far left and, the socialism that, in the words of some of the speakers, Americans fought against in World War II. Really stark comparisons that we saw from the Republicans. So, at the Democratic Convention, they definitely raised the stakes and said that democracy is on the ballot. And I think that what the Republicans were doing were essentially meeting those stakes in their own terms.
Francesca, what were your impressions?
Well, I think last night we were talking about this, Alex. As the speech went on, the president started ad-libbing more and more. And that really struck me because it was so long. He seemed bored with the speech. And you always know when he's about to veer off course because, he starts repeating words like victims and victimhood and, so true. And he didn't do the so true thing last night, but it started to go in that direction, adding whole swaths about the building behind him, things like that. And so I thought it was really telling because even though they tried very hard to write a speech for him and just get him to stick to a teleprompter, he still didn't do that, particularly as it did go on into the past an hour range. And so for the Democratic convention, they had said, oh, Biden, he stuck to a teleprompter. What's the big deal with that? But as a juxtaposition, Trump couldn't even do that. He could not stick to the teleprompter. That's literally the only thing he had to do last night. And so I think that pretty much sets the tone for the rest of this presidential election. But even if he had stuck to the teleprompter last night, the speech, there were times when it wasn't really clear why he didn't just stick with the topic of coronavirus, because he'd talk about it and then he'd move on to something about public safety and then he'd come back to it. So it was really bobbing and weaving just the way that it was written all together. There wasn't a lot of direction to it.
I agree with that. I would say it definitely had the feeling of him checking boxes. It almost felt like a State of the Union speech in ways, where, he was going through all of his accomplishments and obviously the elephant on the South Lawn was the coronavirus, which he gave passing mention to, and there was quite a revisionist history there.
So there was one relatively brief section about coronavirus, which was in keeping with really the whole convention, I would say.
Right.
Well, Michael, let's stick though with the theme, because I think I agree with you that. And think also, this is the most important thing to come out of the Republican National Convention, was that for a campaign and really a political party that had really kind of wildly cast about in its criticism of Joe Biden, criticizing everything from his mental acuity to that he's soft on China, that he is, that he is corrupt. They really seem to focus on just not that he's liberal, but that because he's liberal, you and your family are unsafe. And I actually thought Mike Pence in his speech Wednesday night, really the line that encapsulated that approach to me, quote, "The hard truth is you won't be safe in Joe Biden's America." I mean, it's, very explicit and very different from saying Joe Biden is actually super liberal and he's going to raise your taxes. There was that message, but it was clearly an undercard to this criticism that you won't be safe. Do you think that is going to be an effective message, or at least evaluate maybe some of the pros and cons of that?
First of all of those attacks were there, right? All of the attack on China, the attack on corruption, mental acuity, those were definitely still there. But I do agree that the focus has been sharpened. On Pence's speech, it was, first of all, far less watched than Harris's accepted speech, which might not come as a surprise, but he did offer a preview of his ability to attack the Democratic ticket. And I do think it was something of a shot across the bow for those who think that it's going to, be a blowout when the two of them debate. I think that he has, taken on that attack dog role. And, I think that Biden's response has already formulated, which is, if the Republican ticket is accusing us of, supporting defunding the police, if they're accusing us of, fostering an unsafe environment in the suburbs and in the inner cities, the problem is that we're living in Donald Trump's America today, and he's already previewed that response. And all of this is occurring under the Trump administration. And ultimately, I think that's going to be how the debate plays out, because, we are, in fact, seeing this increase in violence, under Trump. And the question will naturally be, what policies are they taking other than sending law enforcement that's not requested by state and local officials into these jurisdictions?
Yeah, Francesca, I understand the point of view from the Trump campaign and why that they would pursue this course. Of one, and I think we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but it feels like they just don't think they have a great response to the coronavirus pandemic right now, politically speaking, that it's just hard for them to marshal a convincing argument that he has responded well to this, because the public by and large just doesn't think he has. And that's why his poll numbers have dropped. And so they're trying to move on, and they're trying to move on not just arbitrarily, right? I mean, this is the protests and some of the looting and the destruction to buildings and personal harm that have come to people because of that. I mean, they're not making that part up. I mean, that is happening right now in some cities, most recently Kenosha, and so it does feel like they're not forcing this. This might be something that a lot of Americans are paying attention to right now.
Well, and another way that they're strategically trying to move on is by saying, listen, there will be a vaccine. Before it was, it could be by the end of the year. Now it will definitely be by the end of the year, maybe even sooner, which would be, before the end of his first term. And so we have, Michael could speak more to this because he's been covering this extensively, but it's very hard for the president to actually guarantee that there's going to be a widely distributed vaccine before the end of the year. But yet, that is what we saw him get up and do at the Republican National Convention, to strategically be able to move on and try and make it sound like this isn't a thing you really need to worry about anymore because I've got it handled, to be able to move on to those issues that they think that they will do better with against Joe Biden.